Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about intervals. Now when we're trying to discuss intervals we talk about their quantity and their quality. So we're going to start first with their quantity because that's a pretty easy measure. So the quantity of an interval is just the space between them on the staff. So in the case of this first one we have the C to the A. All we do is count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So notice that I'm including both the C and the A when I'm counting. So C, D, E, F, G, A. So when I'm asked for the quantity of this interval, all I say is it's a sixth. Pretty easy, right? So same deal here. The C to the A flat, it doesn't matter that it's flat. It's still 6 steps up the staff. C, D, E, F, G, A flat. That's going to give us 6. Same thing for the A sharp. Now this C to B double flat, that's a little bit different. So spend a second, figure out what the quantity of this interval would be. Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a seventh. So that's pretty easy, right? The slightly more difficult bit is figuring out the quality of the interval, and that's where knowing your key signatures is going to be very, very helpful. So in this case you'll notice that I have C as the bottom note of every interval. So that's for a good reason. When you're figuring out what the quality of intervals is, it's really helpful to know what the key of the bottom note is. So C major we know has no sharps and no flats, so that's going to make this really easy. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, alright, so in the key of C major, which is the bottom note of the interval, does this A exist? So in the scale of C major, could you find that A? And we can, right? So in C major we're C, D, E, F, G, A. So if it exists in the scale and it's a second, third, sixth, or seventh, that's going to make it a major interval by default. We'll talk about the fourth, fifth, and octave in a little bit. So this one is a major sixth. We refer to major with a capital M. So let's look at this second one. We're again basing it on C. So we're looking for C to A flat. We know it's a sixth. That's half of the credit right there. So we're asking ourselves, does A flat belong in the key of C major? And we know that it doesn't. So we say, okay, what should the note be in C major? We know it should be in A. So then we say, okay, what has to happen to get that A to that A flat? So it comes down a half step. So if it was A, it would have been a major sixth. Since it's A flat, it's going to be a minor sixth. And we designate minor with a small m. And it's often helpful if you can put a line on top so I can tell the difference between your capital M's and your small m's. Okay, this third one, a little bit trickier perhaps. So we're going C to A sharp. A sharp doesn't exist in C major, and we know that that A has been raised a half step. So when we get a half step bigger, the major is going to turn into augmented. So this is an augmented sixth, and we use a capital A for augmented. And then this last one, C to B double flat. So we know that it's a seventh, we discussed that. C to B is what it should be, and if it was B then it would be major. What has happened has it's been lowered once, which would make it minor, and it's been lowered again, which makes it diminished. So for all these intervals, so the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, they have this basic pattern. So if it exists in the key, it's major. It's a major interval. If it's one half step smaller, then it's a minor interval. If it's another half step smaller, it's diminished. And if it's a half step bigger, it's augmented. Okay, so what about those intervals that are not the second, third, sixth, and seventh? So here we're talking about the unison, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. So these have a similar pattern, we're just missing one. So we don't call these major intervals, we call them perfect intervals. So when we're talking about unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves, there's no major or minor, it's just perfect. If it gets one half step bigger, it becomes augmented, and if it gets 1/2 step smaller, it becomes diminished. So if we look at these intervals, from the C to the G, we count up, we get 5. C, D, E, F, G. So that's going to be a perfect fifth. This one, a perfect octave. This one's a perfect fourth. We're counting up 4 steps. And that one's a perfect unison. So if I messed around with these, let's say added a flat there and a sharp there, what we have is now a diminished fifth. So we had the perfect fifth, it's been lowered a 1/2 step, and that makes it diminished. Here we had the perfect fourth, the C to F, because F is in the scale of C major. We've raised that by a 1/2 step by putting the sharp with it, and so it becomes augmented. So maybe this one's even a little simpler than the major minor, because you only have to remember the 3. Perfect, up a 1/2 step becomes augmented, down a 1/2 step becomes diminished. So let's try things where we're not in C major. So this first one, we have A as the bottom note. Now if we go back to our circle of fifths, we know that A has 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. So if we look at this one, first of all we work out the quantity. So the quantity is 3, we're just counting up A, B, C. Then we say, okay, well, does C exist in the key of A major? And it doesn't, right? Because we know that A major has a C sharp. So we say, okay, it should have been a C sharp. What's happened to it? It's been lowered a 1/2 step, and that makes it a minor third. Should have been a C sharp, lowered a 1/2 step, minor third. Let's look at this one. E major, again, if we look at our circle of fifths, so we know our key signatures. We know E major has an F sharp, a C sharp, a G sharp, and a D sharp. So the first thing we do is count. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D is a 7th. And then we say, does D sharp exist in the key of E major? It does, so we're done. It's just a major 7th. Okay, and last one. I want you pause the video and try and work this out. Okay, we're back. So A flat major, we know has 4 flats, B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. So first we count the number of steps. So we have 6. So this is a 6th. We say, does F exist in the key of A flat major? It does, and so it's just a major 6th. So far so good? Okay, so this works really, really well when the key signatures are familiar to you. But what do we do when the key signatures aren't so familiar? So I have some examples here. Maybe we don't feel so comfortable with F sharp major. Perhaps we'll become comfortable, but at the moment it's a little bit of a tricky key. So what we can do is, if we move this interval by the same amount for both notes, we can move it to a better place. So let's say I want to move this up by a 1/2 step to G. I therefore have to move the C sharp up by a 1/2 step to D. So you see that this interval, F sharp to the C sharp, and this interval, the G to the D, they are the same interval. So we know in G major that there's a D, so we know that this is a perfect fifth. And if we've kept the same interval, we know that this one is also a perfect fifth. Right? So if you don't know the bottom note's key signature, you can move it around to figure out a better key signature for you. You just have to make sure that you keep the interval the same. So let's look at this one. Crazy. F double sharp. No one likes that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, F double sharp is just F that's being raised 2 1/2 steps. So we're going to lower it 2 1/2 steps, and we're going to lower this D sharp 2 1/2 steps as well to preserve the interval. So here is what we've got. We've got F, and then D sharp lowered 2 1/2 steps becomes D, and then D flat. So F to D flat is the same as F sharp to G sharp, F double sharp to D sharp. The same interval, just at a different pitch level. Okay, so F, we know that D flat does not exist in the key of F major because there's only 1 flat. So it's a sixth. The D has been lowered by 1/2 step, so it's a minus sixth. And then knowing that we've kept the interval the same, we can say that this F double sharp to the D sharp is also a minus sixth. So let's take a second, try and figure out what you would do with this E double flat to D flat, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, so the E double flat, we don't know what E double flat major looks like, so let's raise that by a 1/2 step, turn that into E flat. So that means we also have to raise the D by a 1/2 step. Okay, so now we have E flat to D. We know that D belongs in the key of E flat major, and so we have a major 7th. Okay, last thing to do with intervals is figure out how to write them. This is really easy, again, as long as you know your key signatures. So the first thing to do is look at the quantity. So we know we need a 7th above that, so we just count up G, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then we say, okay, it needs to be major, so what do I need to do to make this F exist in the key of G major? We know that G major has 1 sharp, so that's what we do. So we have G to F sharp, makes that a major 7th. So why don't you try that with this A and the minus 6th. Okay, so the first step is we add a 6th above it, and then we say, okay, what should it be to make it a major 6th? A to F sharp is the major 6th. It's been lowered a 1/2 step to the F natural, so it's exactly where we need it to be. So A to F natural is a minus 6th, and that's intervals.